New weird. Feel weird and stuff.
Okay. This is the last class in this section, which means all of the apologetic stuff that I've been trying to cover for the last 13 weeks, minus 2 that I wasn't here, minus 1 that we pretty much only had, I think, Leah and William. So we've had about 10 weeks to try to cover everything. So just for a little, this is all the stuff we're trying to cover. In fact, I got tired of taping it together. In the process, I've added even more to it, so those are all the things I was hoping to cover, and, well, it got so small I couldn't read it, so now we're right now. So I've been adding to it as I've been putting the material together. So, as I've said before, there is so much here to cover. There's just no way we're going to be able to cover it short of 5 years. Probably forever, actually. But part of what I've, again, have been trying to say, I wanted to give you guys kind of the big picture, let you realize, it appears at this point in you guys' lives from the serious lack of questions or other input that you guys have not had much direct interaction with people who are hostile toward the Bible and God and Jesus. So hopefully this class can be a good primer for you in knowing that at some point when those questions / arguments come your way, that there are at least answers out there, and you won't be stuck like a lot of people who have never really heard any of this material I've been covering and thinking that these people who say the Bible is not true know something magical that nobody else knows. Everything that you will ever hear against God, the Bible, and Jesus has already been argued incessantly for the last 2,000 years, and there really are answers for everything, and anybody who, how do I say it, as I said in the one session, there is no one specific, this is proof that God, the Bible, and Jesus are true, but there's so many, I would already say millions of little reasons that all add up together conclusively to say that if anybody is seriously researching the existence of God, the reliability of the Bible, or the historicity of Jesus Christ, they can find those answers. And there are books. In fact, this one here, I've got the at least Strobel Case for Christ. He actually he went out about and decided that he was going to prove that Christianity was a bunch of delusional, crazy people. And along the way, a funny thing happened. He realized it was all true and became a Christian himself. And this is his book about researching people, trying to find out if God and the Bible can be believed and are true. So there are a number of cases of that. I want to say, I think that was also the case for Josh McDowell. So we can do this without breaking my laptop. I want to say that was a case for Josh McDowell also. I think he was I may be wrong on him. I can't remember his backstory, but there are definitely cases where people seriously look at what the Bible claims. There is enough evidence out there for it to be unquestionable. That said, I went through all those notes to come up with things that I don't feel like I've covered, so I'm going to be skipping all around right now. And then whether we, pardon? Yeah, precisely. And then if we get through all that, I also have what I've kind of put together. I have a lovely printer. You should be able to read it. I put together kind of some, y'all are helping. I put together a take-home sheet for you guys. It's just a really, really, really broad overview of what is all on that list that I was trying to cover. So something for you guys to take home. I would say stick it in your Bible, because at some point, someday, you're either going to have doubts or questions, or people are going to bring doubts or questions to you. So hang on to this. I guess it would have been helpful to put my contact information on there, but oh well. Right now, you know how to find me. Yes?
How am I going to stick that in my Bible? That's way too big for my Bible. My Bible isn't that big.
ability called folding.
Oh.
I will show you how to fold a piece of paper. Unfortunately, we don't have an entire class to dedicate to learn how to fold a piece of paper in half, so this will be a crash course.
You should not be.
Okay, so here we go, in no particular order whatsoever. See, Mr. Giggles, let it go. I'm going to try to cover a bunch of things I haven't covered. Oops, I forgot my markers, I forgot my eraser things. Wow, someone's been hitting a Twix.
That was Grace. She's got a big bag of stuff with Twix and
Wow, she
something
didn't
with
share.
coconut.
Almond Joy.
Yeah, she had Almond Joy, Twix, and Snickers.
Okay, I'm going to see if these Kleenex will work
Best
for.
chocolate. Best
Sorry,
almond
sir.
chocolate ever.
That's what Grace said.
Worst mistake I ever made was loaning the TNT whatever thing, my erasers and markers. I never got them all back. Okay, first thing I want to touch on, and I never touched on, is something called carbon dating. Also a similar concept, radiometric dating. One of the things that you'll hear, especially from evolutionary circles, is that when they try to figure out how old something is, they will use something called carbon dating or radiometric dating. In its simplest concept, basically, since we are carbon-based life forms, everything in life, if you have something that dies, if you have a cell, there is carbon in it. As that carbon, as the item dies, or as the entity, person, animal, plant dies, the carbon starts to go away. And so what they try to do is say, well, because there's this much carbon in it, we know how old that, how long ago that died, because there's only 5 carbons in it now instead of
So
10.
it must be, I don't know, 30 million years old.
Well, that's the catch. And again, as I said before, some of this I'm kind of glossing over because I'm trying to cover a lot of things. Carbon dating in itself, if you knew all the variables, which we do not, can only go out to about 14,000 years. So, based on carbon dating alone, you could never come up with a number bigger than 14,000, because basically it would take, if you had something absolutely chock full of carbon and you knew how much was in it to start with, the way half-lives and things like that work, you can only go back 14,000 years. So first of all, you can't get really long dates from carbon. When they say that carbon dating, when they come up with really long, they'll come up with hundreds of thousands of years or millions of years of carbon dating. You just flat out can't do it. If you're coming up with that, you are cheating and you are using some other presupposition, some other bias to try to come up with a number bigger than 14,000. That's just a fact. Radiometric dating, kind of the same things. I'll stay here with carbon. The problem, though, with carbon dating is, like I said, they don't know all of the answers. The only way for you to know what these answers are is to know what the atmosphere was like when something died. They can make assumptions. They know there's X amount of carbon in the atmosphere now, and they can project back and guess, well, it was, since there's this much now, and 100 years ago there was this much. So if there's this much carbon in the atmosphere, and I don't remember which direction they want to go, or maybe they even try to keep it constant. They then try to say, well, there was always this much carbon in the atmosphere, carbon dioxide. Again, I'm glossing over, I apologize, but trying to cover a lot of things here. They're making the assumption that there was always this much carbon, so if something died, there would always be this much carbon in its cells. The problem is we just don't know. Those numbers can go up and down. Things like the flood can radically affect what those are. We don't know what they started at. We don't know. So depending on what your assumptions are, if there was, now actually let's say here, let's say this is the carbon level. Maybe going back in time there ended up being more carbon. Maybe going back in time there ended up being less carbon. Maybe going back in time, there was more carbon, and then there was less carbon, then there was more carbon. They don't know. They've got no idea, but they're making the assumption when they do their calculations that carbon was constant going back to the beginning of time, which is something I'll touch on again. This is the biggest problem where you get into the evolutionary worldview, is they want to claim, because there was no God, there was no flood, there was no creation, that everything that we see now in nature, well, aside from evolution, which that's a whole other contradiction, is exactly as it was always before, so that we can project backwards. And if you do that, if you find a line, say this line goes down, it appears to go down historically. So we're in the 2000s, it was this. We're in the 1900s, it was this. 1800s, it was this. Past that, we don't have real reliable records on a lot of things, but what will happen is scientists and evolutionists still claim, well, it was like that, so it had to be like that. So that it could get to zero, it had to be 8 bajillion years in the past. How do you spell bajillion? The thing is, they will discount the fact. What, you know how to spell bajillion?
Yeah,
He does.
Okay.
B-I-N.
They will ignore and discount the fact that 6,000 years ago was when the earth was created. So in this case of whatever I'm making up for the example, it never did hit zero. And again, it could have been that way, but then it could have been before the flood, it was this way. There's just things, it could have been at creation, it could have been that, who knows? There's so many variables there. And all of this carbon dating and those type of dating, which then even getting into the rock layers of the earth and stuff like that, that's where they really come into the problems, is they're trying to say, well, there was, and that's the biggest thing. The biggest thing that people who are trying to deny the Bible, if they can get rid of the flood, then it makes them easy to get rid of creation, and then at that point, they try to level everything out and not look at all of the drastic, radical changes that have happened in the earth at the different times. One thing I know I kind of butchered on our very first class, I had asked people if they knew what the definition of apologetics was. And unfortunately, it's kind of one of those things I know so well in the back of my mind that when I was first trying to present it, I think I kind of butchered it. So I want to come up with, I wanted to run this past everybody. Definition of apologetics is from the word apologia, which is originally used of a speech or defense to an answer given in reply, which is basically, so apologetics is saying, if someone asks you a question, actually using what was supposed to be the official verse of the class, 1 Peter 3:15, but in your hearts, revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have, but do this with gentleness and respect. That's the, John, it doesn't help if you're more entertaining than me. So that is really the definition of apologetics, it is basically God and the apostles are saying there are going to be people who are going to question what it is you believe and why you believe, and that you need to have an answer for that. And that's what the study of apologetics is being able to give the answers as to why you believe the Bible and why you believe what's in the Bible is true. Let's see. Some definitions that I would have liked to have covered earlier. When we talk about the Bible, we often refer to the Bible that it is plenary and verbal inspiration, means the Bible is God-given and therefore without error in every part, doctrine, history, geography, dates, names, and in every single word. Those two words, plenary, if I'm pronouncing that, comes from the Latin word plenus, which means full and refers to the fact that the whole of Scripture is every part is God-given. Verbal comes from the Latin word verbum, which means word, and emphasizes that even the words of Scripture are God-given. So something, I guess, why we need to look at, hang on a second. When we look at the Bible, that we do look at the Bible as as the Word of God in its entirety. I don't know if I have time to go. I did find, I know some things I glossed over before was about the manuscripts and the dates of manuscripts. I won't bother reading all this, but this is a more current numbers from 2014, giving examples. The philosopher Plato, his writings were 400 BC. The earliest manuscript we have is 1,300 years after he wrote it, and we found 210 manuscripts. Again, I never really understand how far back that 210 goes. In comparison, the New Testament, the time gap is at 50 years. It's set at 50 years, and that keeps getting closer and closer. I found things that are even saying more like somewhere between 20 and 40. But of that, that's a 50-year gap as opposed to a 1,300-year gap with Plato, and with the Greek. Now let's see, that's the Greek New Testament manuscripts and the Greek New Testament early translations. There are 24,000 copies of biblical manuscripts, where with Plato there was 210. So there is just a lot of copies out of the Bible, and people will look at the information on Plato and say, well, we believe that what Plato wrote is what he actually wrote, and there's a 1,300-year gap and only 200 copies. The Bible, we've got a 50-year gap and 24,000 copies. So that's one of the reasons that we can trust reliability of the Bible. Old Testament manuscripts, we've got over 42,000. So bringing total biblical manuscripts to 66,000, over 66,000. So that's a lot of cross-reference, a lot of fact-checking in and of itself, because all of those copies, they all agree with each other. There's not one copy saying one thing and one copy saying another thing. Actually, quick tangent, that reminds me of one of the amazing things about the Bible. It's written over the course of, 4,000 years, 40 authors, and it all agrees with itself. You look at the Muslims' Quran. Basically, the rules for reading the Quran is if something newer was written and it contradicts the older that was written, the newer stuff takes precedence. So here in the first book of the Quran, it may have said this, but here in the fourth book of the Quran, it says this, so you're supposed to believe this and not that. God never asked us to do that with the Old or New Testament. Let's see. Another one I saw I didn't cover, just the importance of Genesis. A lot of people, even tragically Christians, will say, well, it doesn't matter what we believe about Genesis, about creation and flood. We can go along with what the scientist says. The important thing is that we believe what Jesus says. The thing is, Jesus himself refers to creation. The creation of the world. He refers to marriage being set up by God.
He refers to creation in Job.
God does to that, but Jesus actually refers to it in Matthew. So this is actually the physical, historical.
So in other words, he relates to the law.
Yes, which actually, stop reading ahead. That's down here. It talks about marriage. And Jesus talks about the flood, Matthew 24, 37 through 39. So if people will tell you, well, it doesn't matter what the Old Testament, Genesis, it can be a bunch of fairy tales, but you got to believe everything that Jesus said. Well, Jesus talked about creation. Jesus talked about marriage being set up with Adam and Eve. Jesus talked about the flood. So if we're going to ignore creation and only believe what Jesus says, but Jesus talks about Genesis, either we have to assume Jesus was crazy and didn't know what he was talking about, or we need to accept the fact that Jesus was talking about real, actual things that happened at creation. So you can't go down that slippery path of saying, well, we'll only believe the New Testament or we'll believe in Jesus, and we'll skip all those imaginary fairy tales and keep the scientists happy. It just can't be done. You can't intellectually do that. Some things I want to cover on the Bible itself. One of these, Jesus said, heaven and earth shall pass away, but my words shall not pass away. Matthew 24:35. Numerous places in the Bible talks, the Bible itself, Scripture, God's word will last for eternity. Last, I guess, to eternity. What happens after that, I don't know. But that through the earth, through the time and space that the earth is created, that is the world will not, or the word will not go away. The word will not disappear. Which I always find interesting, because as you look through history, numerous people have tried to destroy the word of God. Brain freeze. I can't remember. Right after the time of Christ, there was brain freeze. There was a Roman emperor who wanted to destroy Christianity, wanted to destroy the Bible.
Nero?
He wanted to too, but that's not the one I'm thinking of. I cannot remember. Guess I should have wrote that down, that'll teach me. But basically, he was doing everything he could to destroy the Bible and destroy Christianity. Basically, if any Bible was found, it was burned. Any person owning a Bible, they were killed, and the Bible was burned. If you knew that somebody had a copy of the Bible, you were killed. If you knew someone had a copy of the Bible and didn't turn them in, you were killed. So there was extreme prejudice against the Bible, and at that point, there in Rome was where Christianity and the New Testament would have originated. So if there was a chance to destroy the Bible, that was the time. Again, glossing over the specifics, about 50 years later, Constantine became emperor. He became a Roman emperor. He then became a Christian. And he was like, well, that kind of sucks that they went and destroyed the Bible. Now what are we going to do? So I read one place where it said they offered a reward for anybody who could produce a Bible. And in like 24 hours, they had 50 copies of the Bible. So even though they had like intentionally killed everybody and burned every copy of the Bible, and they're like, yeah, we changed our mind, can we have one? They started coming out of thin air. So the protection of God on His Word and the seriousness that early Christians took the Bible and took the Scripture, which again you'll hear skeptics claiming that, well, the Bible was just made up, all the good stuff was made up 700 AD, back when nobody knew. They knew. They were willing to risk death to follow the Bible and to respect the Bible. Let's see. Time, okay. Switching back to the millions of years, and actually I kind of covered some of that just a minute ago. A guy named Charles Lyell, basically lived in the 1800s. He was probably one of the first people who presented the idea. Just read this. Only present-day processes of geological change at present-day rates of intensity and magnitude should be used to interpret the rock record of past geological activity. In other words, geological processes of change have been uniform throughout Earth history. No continental or global catastrophic floods have ever occurred, insisted Charles Lyell. This is where we get into some of the stuff I was just talking about, the carbon dating. What the evolutionists and secularists want to do is basically say God never did anything, there's never been anything special happened on the earth, so everything that we look at is going to be how we see it, how we've been able to measure it, and these, as I had earlier, these last 200 years. So since we've now seen a pattern from, it's 216. So any pattern that we see like this, no matter what it is, we're just going to draw it out to its natural conclusion. So if something is getting less from then, that's what we're going to say it was. If something's getting more from then, we're going to say that's what it was. And they're going to take that out to the natural conclusion because they absolutely refuse to acknowledge the flood, which would have just pretty much destroyed all of that, and creation, which would have, well, started all of that. Which at that point, they've got no idea. Like I just showed you with the carbon dating. It could have been creation, whatever it was they're measuring was perfect, started to decay, then hit the flood, may have completely gone away, and then started coming back. So now when they're saying, well, the number should be here then, they cannot conceive that the number was there then in reality. And this is something where, because, and I talked earlier with the flood, I mean, all these rock layers, those are all laid down during the flood. They will not acknowledge it. They will try to convince you that those rock layers have been laid down over millions and millions of years because they want it to match their pretty little graph. Let's see. Ice ages. I didn't really touch on those, and I'll say I don't really know a lot about ice. I don't remember much specifics about ice ages. There really were ice ages. Those ice ages, singular or plural, I'm not sure, would have happened after the flood. Part of the catastrophe with the flood is that with the flood, with volcanoes, with the ash in the air and the water in the air, there was cooling to the point that there was ice ages. How many of them, I can't remember, relatively short. Relatively short compared to what evolutionists will try to tell you. There was an ice age for 40,000 years or something like that. There were definitely some that were triggered by the flood. So if you hear anybody talk about ice ages, their times and durations are wrong, but there is definitely geological evidence for ice ages, and they do fit in with what it would have been like after the flood. There is actually one of the books. I mean, the weather after the flood would have been crazy. I mean, they talk about if you guys have seen the red spot on Jupiter is just a gigantic hurricane that's been going for hundreds of years. I don't remember what they call it. They have some scary sounding name for hurricanes that last that long. But there conceivably were hurricanes like that on Earth. And not quite that big, considering the red spot is probably as big as Earth, but comparable. They were easily very large, very long-lasting hurricanes that could have been continually wreaking havoc. So everything, so it wasn't, and something in there. There are people who then try to compromise the flood with the Bible, kind of when I had the Flood-O-Matic 2000. People are going to try to say, well, it just kind of rained and it filled up and then it drained down and everything was fine. The flood was absolute total chaos.
No, it was a giant bucket.
There you go, yes. And the ramifications of that, destroyed trees, destroyed forests, volcanic activity, plate tectonics, all this stuff that evolutionists want to claim took millions of years, happened in the, I think it was about 400 days that the flood encompassed. Well, 40 that it rained. That is something I did forget to cover. Here, let's see if you can do a better job of not breaking it in view. Flood would have actually been 370 days all total. You first had 40 days. You had 40 days and nights of rain. First of all, day one, the fountains of the great deep broke apart and the windows of heaven were open. It began to rain. This happened on the 17th day of the second month. Noah actually entered the ark 7 days prior to this. Rained for 40 days and 40 nights. The water covered the earth's highest places. The water rose to its highest level 150 days, 120 days after, 120 days, 110, I can count, 110 days after it started raining. So 150 days after it started raining. So there's a 40 days of raining and then another 110 days of the water continuing to rise. Let's see. The spring on the 150th day, the springs of the great deep were shut off, and the rain from above ceased, and the water continually receding. That's now I'm getting myself confused. Okay, we'll just keep going on timeline. 74 days, the tops of the mountains became visible on the 10th month, first day. 40 days after that, Noah sent out a raven. 7 days after that, the dove was sent out. 7 days after that, sent out a dove again. 7 days after that, Noah sent out a dove, and it did not return. 29 days later, Noah removed the cover of the ark on the first day of the month. The surface of the earth was dried up, and Noah could verify to the extent what he could see. 56 days later, the earth was dry, and God commanded Noah's family and animal to come out of the ark. So from day one of the door closing on the ark and the rain starting, it was 370 days total. So that was 370 days total that the flood was happening. Then you had another, how many hundreds of years of hundreds of years of unstable climate and environment just from all this going on. I mean, you just got all this devastation, you got all this dirt in the air, dirt in the water, dead trees floating. That's one of the things they talk about. One of the ways that they conceive of the animals getting from the different continents is that all these trees that were trashed, they all floated to the top of the water and were just floating in these gigantic log mats. They saw that on a much smaller scale with Mount St. Helens, that basically these animals could live on these log mats while they were being floated off to far off continents. But yeah, the Earth was a very big mess and things changed very much. And at some point when that calmed down, then things have kind of stabilized. But secularists, evolutionists want to completely ignore that, and that was obviously very, very world changing. One thing I don't know if I covered when we covered Tower of Babel. As I mentioned, Tower of Babel, that was where all the different languages came on Earth. Secularists want to, here standard theories argue that languages change when people are separated, but the Bible teaches that people were separated at Babel because God miraculously changed a common language. Secularists want to claim that language just magically appeared in multiple different people groups. It evolved from original grunts. And the theory that any language could arise by chance has been refuted logically and mathematically. The idea that the language capacity could come about by chance more than once is even less likely than it evolving accidentally just once. Evolutionists want to try to claim that we started out as ignorant monkey people and figured out how to grunt till people understood what we were grunting, and all of a sudden now language happened, and now, and I don't remember the exact, I think they break languages down into, I can't remember, somewhere between 4 and 7 unique families, that those languages cannot be traced back any further to connect them to any others. So then the argument there is that not only did they magically figure out how to grunt and people understand it, they did it 5 different times to come up with 5 different base languages. Something that kind of occurred to me while I was doing a lot of this research, kind of touching on what David just said. Google search ranking in the Bible. A short tangent by Bill Forsyth. One of the things that the Google search engine looks for in trying to decide if something is true, is relevant to what people are looking for, is how often someone else is talking about it. For example, I have a website talking about the foods that William can eat because of the soy allergies. I have people who find the information that I'm writing about, and then they link to it and they go say, hey, go over and look at Bill's site because he's done all this research on all these restaurants and what he can eat. My site, because other people are linking to it and pointing to it, gains credibility because other people are agreeing with what I'm saying and are referring back to it and saying, this is what this guy is saying is true, he's done his homework. The Bible, as David pointed out, does it all the time. The Bible is constantly referring back to itself. Paul is talking about things that Jesus said. Paul is talking about things that Peter said. Jesus is talking about things that Isaiah said. Moses is talking. It's all, and I'm sorry, I keep looking at the floor because I lost my cap and I'm just getting, oh, there it is. I'm just getting obsessive compulsive about it. So let me just put my cap on and I can quit looking at the floor. So the Bible in and of itself refers to itself. It refers back to itself on many different topics. Then the world itself refers to the Bible and itself. And there's just so much reference and so much pointing back to itself or pointing to the Bible that in the same way the Google search engine rankings work, the Bible is the perfect example of how Google's trying to figure out how to establish credibility. The Bible had figured out how to do it 2,000 years ago. Okay, time-wise, 10:12. Okay. One thing I cover a little more in the handout. The Bible. Back to the translation of the Bible, we're saying the plenary and verbal inspiration means the Bible is God-given and therefore without error in every part, doctrine, history, geography, dates, meanings, and in every single word. The thing is, what you also have to be careful with is when you're reading those words, reading them. Thank you. When you're reading those words, you need to look at those words in context. Because there is poetry in the Bible. There is, hyperbole, where you're saying something to be dramatic. Somewhere in the Bible, I can't remember, is it Book of John, or is it Luke, whichever, says that all the books in all the world could not contain all the things that Jesus did while he was here on earth. There could conceivably be a finite number of books that would cover all the things that Jesus did on earth, because he was only here for 3 years, so or his ministry encompassed 3 years.
3 years.
Well, his ministry. He was on earth for 30 years. His ministry started at age 30, crucifixion at 33. So, but the point being is, there's a lot that can be written about. There's a lot of material out there, and that the Gospels only covered certain parts. Another example, Psalms 139:8. If I go up to the heavens, you are there. If I make my beds in the depths, you are there. Some places, depths is like some places they talk about the depths just like being down in the water. Other translations actually talk about the depths as being hell. So basically, they're saying, the psalmist is saying that if I go to bed in hell, you're going to be there with me. Chances are, the author of Psalms, David, did not really go to bed in hell. I think we can all pretty much assume that. But he's making the point. Again, I think hyperbole is the word I want. That sometimes that things are said in the Bible that are used to make a point. You've got to look at what the plain common sense explanation is being, and you can't read crazy things into words if you look at it in the exact English translation. And I'll get to some more on that. One thing I wrote that I just wanted to throw out, a lot of times when you're looking at the Bible, there are details that just aren't covered. One thing kind of mine even, they don't talk about technology details and a lot of logistics. The Bible is there to make the point that it's trying to make about whatever it is, about history, about God, about salvation, about the entire overarching story of history. It's not going to go into details that sometimes we really wish we would. A perfect example I could say is if, say David had to call his mom. If I was writing about that, I would say David called his mom and asked if it was okay if he could stay for lunch. I'm not going to go into any details about that. Am I going to say David bummed an iPhone from his friend so that he could call his mom on a cellular network, which is something that was invented early in the late 1900s, which is a lot of transmission over communication over wireless radio, but be able to function much like a landline, which is a landline that Alexander Graham. You're just saying what it is you're saying. David called his mother. I don't need to go into that much detail because me right here now, we know what it is that he meant. I don't have to go into the explanations of what a cell phone is. 30 years ago, you probably would have, because if you would have whipped out a cell phone, you would have freaked everybody out. Well, maybe not 30, a little longer than that. But some of it is technology, customs, logistics, locations. There are just things that when we're talking day to day, we're not going to cover and go into details. So you're going to see that sometimes with the Bible. The Bible doesn't owe us all the details or an explanation. So that, like for example, when Noah built the ark, we don't really know how Noah built the ark. You see a lot of pictures where it's like Noah's building the ark with a little wooden hammer and hammer and a chisel or something like that. There's no reason that Noah would not have had some form of technology.
Chainsaw.
Could be changed. Who knows? Like I said, we have no idea what technology was like that before. But for to say that there was no way of, there are people who will argue, well, Noah could have never got it up there. It's like Noah could have figured out how to build a crane. Noah could have figured out how to carve planks using saws. And again, we don't know. We have no idea. I mean, the pre-flood people. Pre-flood, creation humans were perfect, and we've lost a lot of knowledge and ability. So we really have no idea what they had and what they did. And for us to put our presuppositions of saying, well, there's no way Noah could have built the ark because all he would have had was a little hammer and a little chisel, and he would have never been able to do that.
Noah could have had a 3D printer.
Noah could have had a 3D printer, and we cannot disprove that.
Well, you need like 3,000 of them, put them all together, make them gigantic, and build a boat, and make it out of wood.
There you go.
Or make the planks and put wood in there and make the planks out of wood and build a boat. That would work.
Yeah.
Or maybe he like made a little mini boat.
Maybe
and
some
started
circular
doing
song.
And we have no idea. We have no idea. And that's something we need to make sure that we, and that's, I've shown, I know William wants to read this book. This book, Puzzles of Ancient Man. This just talks about things that we see in the ancient world time before Christ, of things that we just cannot explain. And examples are, some of the most common examples are like the pyramids. We still have no idea how they built the pyramids because the amount of how heavy of rocks they were moving, how precise the rocks were moved. They talk about things where they're measuring things and
They were so put together,
couldn't put a piece of paper together. Looking at things that are so flat, some flatness thing that basically you put this against it and shine a light and no light comes through, which means it was absolutely perfectly mechanically flat. There are things that we don't understand. Now the evolutionary worldview, because they will not accept Jesus or God, or the fact that we were created as perfect human beings and had a lot of knowledge and ability, will try to tell you that UFOs came down and helped us because we can believe in UFOs before we can believe in God. So you'll hear a lot of crazy stuff when they talk about things that ancient man were doing, that they'll try to claim, well, UFOs came and taught, or this is about some aliens came or whatever, because they absolutely deny that God or that humans were perfect before the fall. Let's see. Okay, so 10 minutes to cover my takeaway. Actually, I'm not going to give it to you right now. Just grab one of these before you leave. Let's see. Probably actually covered a lot of this right now, so I'm just going to kind of read through it, make sure I didn't make any mistakes here. Definition of apologetics, we just covered that. Apologia, which is originally used as a speech or of defense for an answer to a given reply. Two good verses from that. I just mentioned 1 Peter 3:15. But in your hearts revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you for the reason for the hope that you have. But do it with gentleness and respect. Who do I need to beat now? Okay, guys, please.
Yeah.
9 more minutes. That's all I'm asking. Hold it together. 9 more minutes. Then you can go crazy. 2 Corinthians 10:5. We demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ.
They started it. I wasn't laughing.
Okay, please, guys. We went over plenary and verbal. We already went over that twice. I want you guys to remember, there's a ridiculous amount of information available to defend the Bible and existence of God and Jesus. You guys have seen the chart that I've just come up with on my own. You've seen all the books, and if you remember, this tub's my small one. I had a bigger tub, but I started hurting myself trying to carry it all the way down here. But there's a ridiculous number of books. We've got How Do We Know the Bible is True, Volume 1 and 2.
I never actually read any of those.
Well, you didn't, but I'm letting you know they exist. The answers, they started out with answers book 1, and then they kept coming up with more answers. So then they came up with book 2, book 3, and book 4. So there is a boatload of answers there about why you can trust the Bible and why you should not believe the secular world.
I wouldn't be surprised if they came out with book 5.
They probably will.
And book 7 and 8.
Demolishing supposed Bible contradictions, volume 1 and 2. There will be a lot of times where people will claim, well, the Bible says this, but then it says this, so it's an obvious contradiction, so you can't believe the Bible. Most of those go back to what I was talking about earlier, either that we didn't understand the culture, we didn't understand the writing, but then the irony is all these supposed contradictions that people claim are in the Bible, basically none of them are of any consequence. They'll be like arguing, well, in this verse, it says there were two people, and in the verse it says there was one person. It's like, well, it really doesn't matter in the big picture of things. And number two, in that case, a common literary thing was that if the person writing was writing about what they cared about. So if I relate something that happened today, I may talk, and I talked about David. Well, just because I'm saying I talked about David doesn't mean that nobody else is in the room. It just so happened that David was the person that I was talking about or talking to in that account. So I could, in 3 minutes, go out and say something that could give, we could all leave this room and tell somebody about something that happened in this class, and from those accounts, people could come up with thinking that there were a different number of people in the room. Because it could be each person only talked about one person. One person may have actually given the fact there were 6 people in the room. Someone else may have just talked about the 2 other people that were laughing hysterically and disrupting the class. So then they may have thought, well, there were only 2 people in the room. Yes, you don't need to keep pointing them out. We have that on tape. Oops, where am I? Oh, there we go. Okay, so again, at some point in your life, people are going to either try to convince you or insist that the Bible and God are not true. I am here to tell you that there is a ridiculous amount of material out there that can help you learn that. And I'm hoping that these 10 weeks, I've been able to give you some kind of inkling of what all is available out there. Anything that someone can use to deny the Bible has been addressed. Don't get pulled in by falsehoods. Like I said, I just showed you all these. There is nothing, you will meet people who will think that they are the most cleverest thing on the face of the planet because they just thought of this way that the Bible absolutely cannot be true. It's already been thought of, it's already been refuted. Somebody probably thought of it 2,000 years ago, and this person is nowhere near as clever as they think they are. Don't buy into that. Be vigilant against external or secular arguments. Age of Earth, universe, the millions of years were manufactured to try to explain the universe's existence while denying God. The Bible is true and God does exist. As I said earlier, there's no one argument to prove these, but there are millions of individual arguments that cannot be dismissed by a serious investigator. Jesus was a real person who was fully God and fully human. His birth, death, and resurrection are historically provable and cannot be dismissed by a serious investigator. Skeptics tend to be people who have their minds set against God, and no amount of proof will sway their opinion. At that point, prayer, not arguing, is going to have better results. You are going to run across people who, no matter how convincing you are or how thorough you are with explaining things, they're just not going to agree. In fact, I've read many debates between Christians and non-Christians. The Christian will sometimes just ask, what could I say or what could I show you that would get you to believe in God? And they're just flat out honest answer. If they're honest, the answer is there is nothing. Because no matter what you tell them, no matter how convincing you are, no matter how thorough you are, they just will refuse to believe, regardless of all the facts that are being shown to them. Also, be vigilant against the internal and Christian arguments. My favorite example, the ark was not cute. Too many times, no, I'm getting tired of moving my laptop. Too many times people gloss over biblical accounts. They make the ark look small and cute. They do not, people will try to go buy into the scientific worldview that there was no flood. People gloss over Tower of Babel. I mean, how many times have you heard the Tower of Babel story? Yes.
Question.
Yes.
If they say the ark was not cute and then they said there wasn't any flood, why would they build a boat if there's not going to be a flood?
Well, then they'll argue, well, they can't find the boat, so since we can't find the ark, there must not have been an ark. So you'll get very circular logic, and again, it's
in other words, they don't have a clue.
precisely. People are getting out early.
Like most wood does.
Pardon?
Probably rotted away like most wood does.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you because of the outside.
It probably not dissolved because like most
Disintegrated.
Right, yes. The ark.
Melted.
There are people out there trying to find Noah's Ark. I would be stunned if you found Noah's Ark because it's been sitting out in the elements for, what now, over 4,000 years. I can assure you that Williams Playground will not look as good as it will in 4,000 years because it's only a couple of decades old and it's already rotting and
Not
dissolving.
a couple of decades.
It's not.
Okay.
It's not.
No, probably only a decade or so. Well, because we got it from the neighbors, and yes, it's usually 10 years old. That playground is older than you.
Yes, it is.
I'm sorry, I hate to break it out into a secret. Yes, it's a used playground.
I know.
Okay, back
I
to
just
the topic.
like when we painted it, the time was started for.
No, it's got decay and it's rotting, and I've still got to figure out what I'm going to do with it this year, and that's only been 10 years. So I would be stunned if we would ever find Noah's Ark because of, I think as John said, I think it would have decayed. But you do need to be, you do need to stop and think about what actually happened, what the ramifications are, what happened in the Bible. Especially the flood and Tower of Babel had major ramifications on how the world is today, and too many times those just get passed off as, William, stop. Those, I don't know, whatever you're doing, David finds it terribly interesting. So too many times we just gloss that over as a Bible story or something.
Gloss over. I know.
We too many times gloss stuff over and don't stop and realize what the actual ramifications of that are. Other thing you gotta be careful with biblical reinterpretation. Creation compromises. The guy that probably frustrates me the most is that guy Hugh Ross, who we've talked about before. He tries to take the creation accounts of the Bible and make them fit into his secular worldview. You have to start with the Bible and use the Bible as your definition of how you view the world and how you view history. And that if you try to compromise, you are going to totally mess up things and unfortunately mess up other people because now you've given them reason to doubt the Bible. And the Bible needs to be accepted and believed in its entirety. Another thing I threw on here, you guys need to be careful of biblical secrets. You will at some point in your life hear somebody who claims, well, if you read the book backwards and count every fifth letter or whatever, it says that McDonald's is great. I don't know what. They're going to come up with crazy things. Yes. You were going to, yeah, one of them I remember, I can't remember. If you look at, I think it's Psalms 119, if you go like, I don't remember, X number of words in, there's the word shake, and then you go X number of words from back, there's the word spear. So people try to argue, well, that's the secret code that William Shakespeare actually wrote the Bible, and because this is the way he smuggled that secret note into the Bible so that you would know that he actually wrote it and really God didn't write it.
And the Da Vinci Code.
And the Da Vinci Code, yeah, that was a whole hoo-ha about 10 years ago. You are going to come across people who are going to claim that the Bible doesn't say that. Here, actually, let me go on to this and we'll finish touching on that. Hermeneutics, from the Greek word, means to explain or interpret. It is the branch of theology that focuses on identifying and applying sound principles of biblical interpretation. While the Bible is generally plain in its meaning, proper interpretation requires careful study and is not always an easy task. Consider that the Bible was written over a period of roughly 2,000 years by 40 or more authors using 3 languages, Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek. The authors wrote in different genres and had different vocabularies, personalities, cultural backgrounds, and social standings. The Holy Spirit moved each of these men to produce his inspired, inerrant, and infallible word, but he allowed their various writing styles and personalities to be expressed in its pages. It was written in a culture very different from our modern world and has been translated from its original languages. These are just some of the factors that must be taken into account as we interpret. This is not the claim that only the scholarly elite can correctly interpret the Bible. The Bible is penned so that its pages, that in its pages, all people, even children, can learn about God and what He has done so that we can have a personal relationship with Him. Going back to that, that's where you get into people who claim their secrets in the Bible. That if you read this particular version or you read it this particular way or you cry, there's a guy out claiming that there's a verse in the Bible that was predicting the 9/11 attacks. I mean, you can't go that far reading too much stuff in the Bible, and that will lead you astray. People who will say they're finding new secret magical things in the Bible now can actually cause more damage to the Christian faith than people who just flat out claim the Bible isn't true. So that's something you got to be careful of. You always have to go back. What was it? The Berean church?
Is Hugh Ross the one that sang the Fire Ant song?
Pardon?
Is Hugh Ross the one that's the Fire Ant song by any chance?
I don't know. If there's any song that had anything to do about creation, I would assume that would be Buddy Davis from Answers in Genesis. But I'd have to check on it. I don't see Hugh Ross doing any singing. Hugh Ross runs a ministry called Reasons to Believe. But yeah, so you want to be careful. A lot of people get messed up by people claiming they found something in the Bible that nobody else has found before. I put in here, Answers in Genesis is an excellent resource for solid biblical apologetics, especially creation, flood, and Babel. A lot of the books I have are Answers in Genesis, not exclusively Answers in Genesis. I will say I've been very impressed with Answers in Genesis and that their commitment to the entire Bible. Yes, they are more, since their name is Answers in Genesis, focused on the book of Genesis, but they do have a lot of material as far as reliability of Bible, reliability of Jesus Christ, and a lot of cool physics and science and stuff there too. And then as a note, which would have been good if I put some kind of contact information, anytime in the future I'll be happy to answer any questions you have. I personally won't necessarily know all the answers off the top of my head, but I'll do everything I can to answer your questions. So at some point, you guys will run into people who will ask you things that sound wrong, whether it's from the secular world claiming the Bible's not true, or if from people who are Christians but claiming that they know something about the Bible that nobody else knows. Oh, that builds character. William, stop the camera.
Camera.
So
Bye-bye.
take those and touch.